It's 1905. I'm in Merstham in Surrey, and there's been a murder. In a previous murder show, we learned how one Robert Henry Money was leading a double life. He was married to a woman called Edith, and was also living in sin with another woman called Florence. He had children with both of these women. He had moved them both down to the seaside resort of Eastbourne in 1912, only streets apart from one another. Neither women knew of this mischievous two-timing, and yet, incredibly, the women were sisters. Pretending to be a captain in the military, he called himself numerous fake names. The best one, known to the sisters, was Robert Hicks Murray. But life had become too complicated for him, and he had lured both families into a house in Ennis Road and brutally murdered them, women and children and all. He wrote a suicide note and turned the gun on himself immediately after setting the house on fire. But Florence hadn't died. She had survived to tell the tale and live with the extraordinary memories of her fantasist lover and his evil deeds for the rest of her life. But I wonder, did she ever know of the other murder that Robert Henry Money had most likely been involved in? If killing his own wife, lover and children was a simple thing for him to do, then surely snuffing out the life of his own flesh and blood would be a trifle affair. For in 1905, Robert Henry Money's sister, Mary Sophia, came to a brutal and untimely death. On the 24th of September 1905, here in Merstham, maintenance work was about to be carried out on the railway tunnel. It's part of the London to Brighton line and runs just north of the village of Merstham, here some 45 miles from the coast and 15 from the centre of the capital, London. The tunnel itself runs for just over a mile underground and was completed in the late 1830s to tackle the problem of the North Downs, this being a ridge of undulating hills that runs east to west just south of London. Foreman William Peacock and his workers were just starting their tour of duty on that late Sunday evening with their torches and railway tools. Hardened men, may be, equipped for most track disturbances and events, but nothing had prepared them for what they were to discover that autumn night. 400 yards in from the southern tunnel entrance, they stumbled across the severely mutilated body of a woman. It was an horrific sight, and not at all pleasant, I imagine, to look at. Peacock immediately returned to the railway station at Merstham and called for a doctor and the police. His report later that night read, Sub-Inspector W. Peacock. While walking through the Merstham tunnel at 10:55 this evening, found a female body about 400 yards from the end of the tunnel. The police took charge of the body and searched it. No address or ticket or money was found on it, and nothing to show who she was. The body is lying at the Feathers Hotel, awaiting an inquest. I'm sitting in my car outside the Feathers Hotel, just off the A23 here, on the old London to Brighton road here in Merstham. It's a stone's throw from the railway station and about half a mile from the southern end of the tunnel entrance. And it was in the coach house that the poor remains of the so far unidentified woman were placed here. In Johnny Johnson's book, Tales of Mystery and Murder, published by Countryside Books, he describes the corpse as follows. The face was pulped, the nose smashed, the skull shattered, the top of the head sheared away at the hairline. The woman had worn a hat and part of the veil was embedded in the brain. Her left arm was crushed, her thighs broken, and one leg almost detached. I'm now standing on the road bridge looking north to the south end of the Merstham tunnel entrance, which is about 200 yards in front of me. The railway track lies, well, I don't know, about at least some 50 feet beneath me, with steep inclines either side which make it very difficult to access. Now, it seems inconceivable to me that a young woman in her early 20s, dressed in a thin net-like dress with no coat, would have crawled down the banks on the cool autumn evening and then wandered deep into the dark, foreboding tunnel at around about 10 o'clock at night. And why would she do that? Under the influence of alcohol? Well, maybe. Or was it a suicide? If that was the case, why walk so far into the tunnel just to be hit by a passing train? Surely there are more easier methods to do away with yourself. It was certainly baffling the police, although not for very long. The dead woman was obviously not a poor woman. She wore several rings on her fingers and had a gold chain around her neck. She was also very well nourished and strongly built, and her hands bore no signs of manual work. Her black cotton dress was definitely not working class, but more something worn on a social occasion. She would be missed, and sooner rather than later. However, her underclothing had laundry markings, which helped, and hours later she was named as Mary Sophia Money, and the following afternoon, the Monday, she was formally identified by her brother, Robert Henry Money. Known more by her middle name, Sophia had only been 22 years of age. She worked for Messrs. Bridger & Co., dairymen at 245 Lavender Hill, Clapham Junction, south of London. She lived in a house at the dairy with another girl called Emma Hone. By all accounts, she was a happy, sensible, charming girl, and not one suffering from depression of any kind. Local doctor Henry Cricket was called to the scene, and he observed that Sophia must have fallen out of a speeding train. He discovered the horizontal markings in the soot-covered tunnel walls running some 5 foot 8 inches parallel with the ground for a good 40-foot stretch, and then indicated where a head and hands had hit the brickwork and then rebounded with the train and finally ended under it. Sophia would have died instantaneously. But did she fall? Or was she pushed? Suicide was how the verdict was recorded, but there were many strange circumstances and observations which may give us cause to beg to differ. When the body was carefully lifted and carried up here to the Feathers Hotel waiting for an inquest, it was discovered that pushed deep into Sophia's mouth was a gag. So deep was it thrust into her mouth, the police had difficulty removing it. The doctor had recorded that there were bruises and abrasions on the roof of her mouth and around her gums, and he hinted that this was most likely caused by the forced insertion of a gag, perhaps by an assailant's fingers, or even by a stick. And what about the gag itself? Not just an old hanky or a rough bit of rag, but a white silk scarf. In fact, the one that Sophia had been wearing as she boarded the train at Clapham Junction. Now, call me a cynic if you like, but if you're going to leap off a train to your certain death and grotesque dismemberment, why would you bother to shove a gag down your own throat? And it does seem incredibly unlikely that the scarf would have found its way there during the rough and tumble of the fall. So was it murder? And if so, are there any helpful clues? Unfortunately, not. We do know that there was no sign of the purse that she'd been carrying, and we know also that it contained her weekly wages and she'd just been paid. But if she was murdered, was she really gagged and forced out of a moving train just for that? It does seem extremely doubtful, so maybe there is some other answer. Earlier that Sunday evening, at about 7 p.m, Sophia mentioned to Emma Hone that she was going out for a little walk and that she wouldn't be back late. She didn't say where she was going or whether she was going to meet anyone. Emma confirmed that Sophia had been carrying the black cotton purse. She popped into the tobacconist's in Railway Approach, close to Lavender Hill, where she worked, and bought sixpence worth of chocolate. From there, she crossed the road and bought a ticket from the railway station at Clapham Junction. A ticket collector at the station recognised her a few days later from a photograph. From there, the rest is conjecture, with a couple of possible sightings. So, what was Sophia doing getting on a train at Clapham? She told her friend that she was going for a little walk. The ticket collector had recalled that she was going to Victoria Station, the main southeast terminus for London, which was, 1 or 2 stops north? But why Victoria? And then to catch another train and head back south again, passing Clapham Junction and then beyond? I mean, I know this route very well. I travel to London on the same line. So the train would have passed and possibly stopped at a number of stations, including Battersea Park, East Croydon, Purley Way, before vanishing into the Merstham tunnel. It was well known that young couples seeking privacy would buy a first-class train ticket and sit in the more expensive but discreet compartments to carry out their courtship. So had Sophia gone to meet someone for such a rendezvous? It's true that Sophia had a boyfriend. She was walking out, as the expression of the day puts it, with a young man from Harrow. But he had a cast-iron alibi for the Sunday. So perhaps she was meeting another man. Possibly her brother? The point is, she got on a train and it was heading towards Brighton. And about 15 miles south, she was lying smashed to pieces on the railway track, deep in the Merstham tunnel. Her dismembered corpse, when found, was reported to be still warm. So she was going somewhere, and with a purpose. A guard spotted a young woman in a first-class compartment with a man with a long, thin face. He recalled the girl had a long, muslin-looking thing around her neck. Was this Sophia's scarf? This was at London Bridge on the 9:33 p.m. train. It would take about 20 minutes to reach the fateful tunnel. It was estimated that Sophia had met her end at about 10 p.m, so this would fit. But it wasn't conclusive. However, later, passing through Red Hill, south of Merstham, the guard looked in again and saw a man, possibly the same one, alone in the carriage. The girl had gone, and he hadn't noticed her anywhere else on the train, although, obviously, he hadn't been looking specifically. But there again, maybe the young woman had simply stepped off the train at any number of the smaller stations along the way. Or had she been flung from this speeding train in the darkness of the mile-long tunnel by the man with the long, thin face? A signalman in a signal box gave evidence that he saw a man and a woman struggling in a carriage at Purley Oats, just north of the tunnel. But was this evidence? A fast train, 2 people standing, possibly struggling. He had brief seconds to assimilate the scene. And of course, his judgment or memory may have been clouded in retrospect by the news of the incident. So, as the hard facts go, the trail does indeed go cold. And suicide was the final, although by no means convincing, verdict. So what about the brother, Robert Henry Money? Why is there a question mark hanging over him? He certainly had an alibi for the Sunday night, but after the event, he did seem to offer the police a number of hopeful leads, names of men that knew Sophia, but each was ineffective and unhelpful. Were these deliberate red herrings? Many a murderer has offered to help the police by suggesting possible suspects and thereby deflecting suspicions from himself. Did money have a hold over his sister that we do not know about? They both certainly had shares in the family dairy business. Later, Money sold off his shares and bought property in Clapham, renting them out and living off the profit. And the future would prove him to be a bigamist, a liar, a fantasist, and of course a cold-blooded murderer. So was Robert Henry Money the man on the train glimpsed by the guard? Did he struggle with his sister, ram her scarf down her throat, pinch her wages and push her mercilessly out of the train to die in a horrific and untimely way? Was this a pre-runner to the Innis Road murders? Did getting away with this dreadful killing of his sister make it any more easier to terminate the young lives of his wife and children a mere 7 years hence? Or did Mary Sophia simply meet a young suitor and take a train journey, travelling first class for privacy, and then, when the amorous affections of her male counterpart went too far and she resisted, end up in a frightful struggle that had her spilling from the door of a fast-moving train? I don't suppose we shall ever know the truth, but it does make you think, doesn't it?